Okay, today we will discuss parts of the central nervous system. So we are talking about brain and the spinal cord. That's the central nervous system. Okay. So before we go on to do the different parts, we will just summarize what we've done or what we left out in the video prior to this one. Gray matter and white matter. So here is a neuron with its synaptic bulbs. These are the dendrons. Cyton, the axon. So axon is covered by this myelin sheath. So this part is your white matter, and this part is your gray matter. So gray matter forms the main body of the cell, the cyton or the perikaryon. This axon forms the white matter. So in the brain, gray matter is outside and the white matter is found inside. And the spinal cord is the other way around. We find the gray matter inside and white matter outside. So that's very important to understand because it's often asked the location of gray matter and white matter in the brain and the spinal cord. You move on to the next one. Inside the neuron, we do not find a centrosome. In a mature neuron, centrosome is absent. The work of the centrosome is to initiate and regulate cell division. So if this is not present, that means the neurons are not able to divide. So a mature neuron cannot divide. There's no cell division. We move on to the next one. It's called the glial cell or glia. These are cells which do not transfer, which do not carry information or impulse. They're just there to help or support the neurons. Okay, they're also known as neuroglia. You just understand that glial cells or glia just are supportive cells which help nourish and have a supportive function as far as the structure and the function of glial cells is concerned. Then we move on to neurotransmitters. We're talking about this part, the swollen part, where you have a Nissel's granule. Okay? So Nissel's granules help form what's known as the neurotransmitters. And in ICC, we just need to do two neurotransmitters. They are acetylcholine and norepinephrine. So these two neurotransmitters, their job is to help the impulse jump over. This is a dendrite of another neuron. Here's a microscopic gap. So the impulse cannot jump over. It needs the help of some chemicals. And the chemicals that help pass the impulse over or across the microscopic gap is called your neurotransmitters. And the two neurotransmitters that you need to know is acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Okay. So having said that, we'll move on to the structure of the central nervous system. First of all is the cerebrum. This part we're talking about. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. And it is divided into two hemispheres. Okay? The cerebral hemispheres, the left cerebral hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Okay? And it is from, let's say it's a frontal view, there's a groove that separates it. So this groove is called the median fissure. Median fissure, FISS. Okay. And the left part of the brain and the right part of the brain, they control different things. So here, left is more logic based. All calculations, facts, and figures, okay, memory, calculations, everything done by the left hand side. The right hand side is more of imagination. It's really more into art, and the appreciation of art, aesthetics. You can also add fashion, etc., etc. So most of the time, every human being has more of this, less of that, or more of this, less of that. It's a combination, okay? When we say imagination, this is thinking of a new story, sort of, or you can straight away say you can tell lies, conceive of a story which is not there though. So imagination, right? But the thing is, it's the right brain that controls all of this. Okay? Art, meaning music, and your drawing, your skills, fashion, all of that is controlled by the right side of the brain. So every human being has a combination of this. So with that over, we'll go to gyri and sulci. This part, the cerebrum, actually contains a highly convoluted portion, meaning the tissue of the brain is highly folded or convoluted. So it forms this raised part and the depression or the valley sort of structure. So this is the raised part, and this is the what we call the depressions. So the raised parts are called your gyri, and the depressions or the grooves are known as your sulci. Or if you use singular for that, it's sulcus and gyrus. Sometimes they can ask you what are these. So you can just say gyrus are those mounds on the folds of the cerebrum, and sulcus or sulci are the grooves that are formed in the what we call convolutions of the cerebrum. Now the cerebrum is, the work of the cerebrum is all mental activities or cognitive activities. All mental activities is controlled by the cerebrum. I've divided the cerebrum into 4 different parts: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. So the frontal lobe is this one: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal, and the occipital. Okay, and each of these have different functions. We move first to the frontal lobe. It controls your mental activities. Meaning analysis, calculations, memory, etc. Parietal lobe has to do with the interpretation, the perception and interpretation of texture, what we call sound, temperature, etc. Temporal lobe is this one. That's the part which actually interprets language. A person is able to speak 3 or 4, probably more than that, all those different languages, and he has to sort out all those words into a meaningful sentence. And formation of speech you can't just throw a bunch of words. It has to come in a sequence. Those words has to come in a sequence. So all of that is done by the temporal lobe. So we just write formation of speech, interpretation of language, understanding of words, all of that. Then lastly we have the occipital lobe. This is the back part of the head. So this is related to visual experience. So let's say it controls all visual experience. So these are the different parts of the cerebrum and its function. We move on to the next one. This was cerebrum. We move on to the next one called the cerebellum. It's also known as the little brain. The work of the cerebrum is it controls and coordinates all voluntary muscular activity. So voluntary muscular activity means the activity of the voluntary muscles. Voluntary muscles are present on the skeleton. Okay, all the muscles that are present on the skeleton is controlled by our will. So we can move these muscles according to our wish. So all of that is controlled by cerebellum. So that it can bring about a smooth motion as against a strobe motion. The strobe motion is a motion that stops. Okay, we have strobe lights, those disco lights that they are not constantly beaming that light. It stops and it comes in. You've seen those lights, they just blink and along with the beat. So that's a strobe light. Similarly, strobe motion is also not a smooth motion, but it stops regularly. So that in order to bring a smooth motion, the cerebrum has to control the working of different muscles. For example, just to pick up a book from the table, my eyes have to see the book, locate the book, my hands have to reach for the book, I have to apply enough effort to lift the book, only enough, okay, not more than that, otherwise the book would go right up. So just to lift it up, and with the weight of the book, I must not topple over because I'm standing on two legs. So my back muscles have to contract and keep that balance. So all of that coordination is done by the cerebellum. Now, if you take alcohol, and some of you do take alcohol, and then it is this part of the brain that gets disturbed by alcohol. And because of that, you lose your coordination, and a person begins to move like a windscreen wiper. Goes this way and that way. His speech becomes slurred, because he will not be able to form the words properly. So all of that done by alcohol and its influence on the cerebellum, right?